Here we go then. This is a bit of a big old job, this one. It's keyed right round the sides and across the bonnet with some lovely curse words. And it's becoming more and more of a common thing that I've started to notice while I've been working in insurance shops. I see some guys like Matt, he was just put up a picture of a BMW with some delightful words wrote all over it. But I'm starting to think this could be, I want to get my car resprayed. Oh, it's, cost me a lot of money. Actually, I'll just key my car up myself, and then I'll just pay my insurance excess. So if I wanted to do it with my car, my excess is £350, but because I used a comparison site, they will give me £250 back. So essentially I could key my whole car like this one, and only pay £100 for the respray on it, which is to my advantage if I wanted to sell the car, let's say. So I have got no idea why this is happening. It could just be people playing around. I believe the owner of this car was playing the field, shall we say. Only for a partner to find out and draw all over our car. But we'll get into the paint. As you can see, this is a big job, and I had an issue after the base coat had dried, actually. And within the Exalta group, you've got Spiezeka, Standox, Exalta itself, and they've got a couple of these paints that I've been using. It all goes on in one go, and it doesn't like to be reapplied to itself. It kind of draws in. It looks very grainy. So after I put the paint on, I went round it with a torch, as you'll see, and after it had dried, it looked worse. Like you could kind of see on the doors on this passenger side here, there's two big orange patches left at the bottom, and they were still visible, but they were visible after the paint had dried. So it was a weird one. I was toying with the idea of just wet on wet in the whole car, but this, it's a big old job to just put some wet on wet round, so I didn't. And I don't know, that's the thing as well. If you're in the US, because I live in the UK, you guys use a lot of sealer. You're always putting base coat sealer over stuff. So I'd be interested to know if you would have done that on this job. So write that in the comments. Let me know what your approach would have been. But getting back to the point is, this stuff doesn't like to be reapplied. So I've come up with like a little technique myself to reapply this paint after the base coat has dried. So we'll get into that when we get round to it. This is my 1.2 HTE clear at 2 bar, I think full fluid, full fan, and I'm just applying the wet bed or the transparent base or the blender, whichever way you guys call it, but it is just a transparent base coat. And I'm going to be doing it in sections around the car, just to, because it dries. That's the problem with it being going on in one go. You can't kind of go just race around the car and then come back and put another coat on. It has to be completely finished. So it's a bit different doing a larger job, but we'll go about it the same way. As you can see, I'm doing my blend first, making sure that that's right, and then I'm going to go and hit the primered areas, making sure that they're completely covered as well. I did think that white is a tad bright. You'll see that as well. It'll take a little bit of time to cover that, because you can see here the base coat's doing next to nothing. That was a last minute addition. There was a bit of a naughty bust through, and the prepper said, "Oh, should I put some aerosol on that?" And I was like, "Definitely," because it's just a scratch. Most of it had come out in the base, but there was a couple of areas that you could sort of see metal. So I was like, "Yeah, it definitely has to be covered." But he's picked up the white instead of the mid grey, so it does take a little bit of extra paint to cover it. But again, this is what I'm explaining as well, having a good torch. You need to go in there and make sure that this thing is covered, because once it dries, as I was saying, it doesn't like to be reapplied, so you can't get away with putting another coat on and letting it dry and putting another coat on as you normally would. So you have to make sure this thing's covered in the one hit. And you just see here, going up onto the bonnet, same thing really, just making sure that I'm getting the right sort of coverage. You can still kind of see that primer edge, but we'll catch it on the way back. You'll notice the distance of the gun will increase slightly, and I'll just slow down a tad, and that'll get me my coverage. But that is a big advantage of using the Exalted brand paints. They're so fast, and this is a big old job. If you could imagine getting around it and then come back, put another coat around it, let it flash, come back, and then get your drop coat on, make sure it's all good. And then, like what happened to me, God forbid, you've got an area of paint that actually isn't covered, so you have to then reapply, redo your drop coat or your effect coat. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting job. This, it had let's say some not nice words on it, and it was, when you see it come in, you're like, wow, who's done that? Understandably, the customer wanted it off the street pretty quickly. If you can imagine something like that parked outside of your house every day. So they were like, can you come and collect this before too many of the neighbours see? And maybe figure out what's been going on. Well, you could definitely figure out what was going on when you seen what was wrote on the bonnet. But, again, just keeping it steady here with the paint. Back in for the effect coat. Slightly further away, a little bit slower. I mean, it's not drastically slower, but you can see that I'm getting the right amount of coverage on this. So, yeah, just carry on round the car. You'll notice as well that you see these two patches on the bottom of the driver's door and the front of the back door. That is base coat down there, but it just, it seems really, really dark. Well, I say original base coat, and then I'm applying it, but you could kind of see that white band in the middle with the primer. But it was apparent after it had dried, but not while it was wet, so it was an awkward one. But yeah, I'll show you my little tip, like I say, when it gets to it in the video, how I've got around it, shall we say. And it's not the normal way, Standox or Spezek or anyone like that, anyone from the Exalted brand would tell you can only really get away with reapplying in small areas. So traditionally you would turn the pressure down just to stop the overspray so much, and you'd move closer to the panel and just sort of lightly waft it in. But because it was quite a large area, it was difficult to get away with doing that. Yeah, you'll see here, I'm just sort of double checking with that effect coat, trying to make sure it goes on, and sort of from where we're looking now, it looks alright. I got the torch out, I had a look, but then after it dried, it was like, ooh, can't even remember what I'm pointing at here. This one was a couple of weeks back there. It might have been the lighter edges, you can see on the bottom of the door. If I point that out, that edge was still apparent, yeah, so that is what I've been pointing at. And it, again, look, it seems to be covered, but those same lines, they came back after it was dry, so it was a little bit a bit of a weird one. I was kind of scratching my head as well, and there's another little imperfection there, and I do believe that was from possibly the aerosol that I'd put on. If that area is still a little wet, it can cause issues. So here was the thing, I was thinking to myself, what do I do here? Do I kind of over-apply the paint? I've had the odd heavy edge where I've put the gun too close to the car by accident, or on like a bonnet, a bumper or something like that, and just where the base coat's too wet, it moves a little. I've had that before, and if you're lucky, it will dry fine. It won't really be noticeable. If it's really bad, then you've got an issue. But I decided to put slightly more base coat than I would like in that area, and look at me, I'm going over it again here. But I lucked out, and I did get away with it. It didn't come back through. But yeah, that's the base on for now. Like I say, I always like to have a look around it and double check, just make sure that there's no areas looking through. And then you'll see here with the torch in the dark, I like to turn the lights off as well, just so you can get a better look. And the base coat is still dripping wet. I didn't do anything. When I cut the camera, I just ran out and got my torch out of the toolbox to come back in and have another look. Because obviously, with it being a worse paint to sort of reapply the paint, the base to, you want to make sure it's covered now. So any bust throughs, any primer edges, anything like that, that's why I'm going over it. Just double checking. You'll see here, you know, checking the blend up there, going over the door, and you'll see that there's nothing there. It doesn't seem to be apparent that there's anything wrong. I do believe, because the amount of paint that I've put on that back end, you know, I'm pointing at it here, but I think there's 2 on the back passenger door. There's 2, they look like fish eyes, but it's pigment migration. You just see I'm pointing them out there. And that's basically, it looks like a fish eye, but because I've over applied the paint, it's not wanting to make a film anymore. It's just going, what's going on here? There's way too much base coat, and it hasn't turned out that well. So you see I've grabbed another gun because I've put the blender through my original gun. Now you can see here, I'm pointing it out, you can still see it. So there's a couple of areas that I'm not happy with. So I put blender into, it's my HTE base, it's a 1.3, again full fan, 2 bar, and I'm just going to reapply the wet bed as if this was a new job, and it works. I wouldn't want to do it too many times though. I tried it on an Astra wing, and it worked. You know, it was a slightly grainy, but I just apply a bit more here. You'll see I'm just sort of hoofing this on as if it was like a clear coat or something. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix into the binder the base coat, and then I'm going to do sort of not a mid coat, but it's a very transparent version of the base paint. And then that way, because it doesn't actually affect the colour, when I apply it, we can get enough on there to cover the sort of see-through areas. So you see here when I pick it up, I'm going to say signal to you 2-to-1. So I've got 2 parts paint, 1 part binder, 2-to-1. And I'm just going to go back over it. So this is, again, very, very transparent, but it is going to give me some colour. So I'm just going to use this lower down, probably try and stay away from the edges. So I'm not going to the end of the wet bed or the blender. I'm not going right to the end of it, and I'm going to stay away from the top of it as much as I can and work within that area. And then hopefully that will give me the coverage that I need. I say hopefully, I know it did, because the job went out the door and it was alright, but it's one of these, just because the way that the paint is, it's great for speed in the workshop, but if you have a problem, it's not the easiest to work with. So it's one of these, because we're in a fast-paced environment, sometimes it's going to happen. And you know, whether it's you have to nib the base coat because there's something in it, like I say, you can drop the pressure and reapply locally, and you know, try and keep that repair as small as possible. But on a large area like this, I'd never had it before, so it was kind of scratch the head, have a little think, what can I get away with here? So you know, I had it on like I said, a job before, the Astra. I tried it with a wet bed and it worked. It was a little bit grainy, but that was a silver as well, so it was, yeah, you know, any mistake on a silver is going to stand out. So you know, this was the moment of truth. I was looking at it and I was thinking, it seems to be covered, but it seemed to be covered while it was wet before, so I had no idea what was going on when, you know, or what's going to look like when this dries. Fortunately it worked. So you know, if you have a larger job later on when you're doing one of these Exalta products, you know, just keep that in the back of your mind that you can get away with it. You know, I was kind of tempted to do a clear coat it and then just redo them 2 doors, you know, keep the car in the oven and redo it, but you know, that can be a costly way to do it. So I figure if it's going to be a rework, let's try and fix it in situ, and then, you know, if it needs redoing, it needed redoing anyway. So, and everything's kind of normal here. I'm just going to come in with my Wacom Geo 1.2 full fan, full fluid at 2 bar. And you know, I'm very, very consistent with my gun setups and things like that. because it works for me, I don't see the need to change it. I know people are always asking for gun setups, you know, how do you do your gun, how do you do this, how do you do that, but it's kind of, I've found what works for me, and I'm not going to change it. Why would I? You know, why would you? If you found something that you can reproduce, you know, a good finish time and time and time again, why would I start mucking about with it? The only time I would ever play with the adjustments is if I'd put a new sort of setup in it or bought a new gun. I'm considering some new guns at the minute, but I don't, to be honest, I don't think I would look to other painters to say, how do you set your gun up? I would play with it. So for me, when I get a new gun, I'll probably wind it in to the as tight as it will go, and then wind it out 2 full turns and see where I'm at. And you'll know right away if it's too fast or too slow, so then you adjust from there. That would be my tip. But like I say, because I know what I'm doing with this gun, I like it wide open at 2 bar full fan. You know, there's no need to change that between jobs. And I'm just with this clear coat here, I'm just trying to follow the wet line around the car. But sometimes as well, I've had the odd comment. I like to start in the middle of the bonnet sometimes and work my way to the edges. And I've had a comment, and someone's like, "Who's taught you how to lacquer?" And it's like, well, it works. There's no obvious difference. I could imagine if I was using an incredibly fast clear, like the Extreme, where it'll, you know, you can bake it in 12 minutes. I might have a problem finding the wet edge, but generally I don't have any issues. I've followed the wet edge in this particular job because it's a big job, but if that's a bonnet on its own, I more than likely would have started in the middle, worked my way to the outside, gone back to the middle, and worked my way from the middle back. I know that there can be issues with over applying clear in, you know, say in the middle where the overlap is, but you have to be conscious of your overlaps anyway. Like on the way up the door here, I'm probably closer to 75% overlap than a 50%, but that's just the way I lacquer. I have seen people do bonnets, like I was saying, from the middle and have solvent pop just in that middle area, but that's because they've over applied it. But again, that's just conscious of knowing how much product you're putting on. I mean, sometimes you can see that there's way too much on. Lacquer as well will go quite milky if you bash it on. You know, it'll turn white for a second, and you'll be like, "Oof, this isn't good," and it'll flow out, and it'll typically end in a run or whatever. But you know, I'm comfortable doing it that way. So, you know, when you get these comments, who's taught you? Oh, no one. Part of the reason why I do the channel, people don't like to share their tips and tricks, but I'm like, how's the next generation of painter behind you gonna learn anything if you don't help out? You know, talking to less experienced people, and they're like, oh, that's a good tip and trick and all that stuff, and it's like, well, you hear people complaining that there's not enough talent, you know, or, you know, you can't find good staff and all this stuff. Well, no one's sharing the information, so that was part of the reason I was doing this channel. Yes, nobody taught me how to lacquer. It was just, there's a gun in a scrap panel that what I started with, and off you pop, you know, figure it out. Not that there's, and it's hard to, especially with lacquer and stuff, it's hard to share a tip. You know, you've got to figure out how fast your arm speed is, how fast the gun puts fluid out, which is why you need to adjust your fluid tip. You know, it's got to work for you, but in terms of, you know, little things, it's just, you know, share your knowledge. All you're going to do is increase the productivity in your shop. It's not going to make you look any worse. That's where you start to get these people that would rather tear down the largest building than build the biggest building kind of mentality. If I regularly make mistakes, I should sabotage the other painter to make him look like he makes as much mistakes as me. And, you know, that's not the way to go. I quite like working with skilled guys, because then you've always got a shoulder to lean on. I always go on about relying on other people. Work with a fantastic painter here at this shop, Adam, and you could just point at a job and he'd do it and it'd come out immaculate. And, you know, he was really, really skilled. But I remember one day I was having a nightmare. Everything I touched went badly. I'll try not to swear. pushed the car in the oven and it wasn't on the skids properly, and I managed to catch, it was a long car, it was a long Jaguar, I managed to catch the rear bumper, which we were painting anyway, but it caused more damage. I caught it on these sliding doors when we were pushing it in, so then I had to sort that out. I over-poured the mix. I'm sure I dropped something that morning, like paint, and just everything I was touching was going wrong. Sometimes you'll have a day like that, but if the next painter in your workshop isn't very good, you can't kind of lean on him and go, you know, can I have a hand here? But because Adam's phenomenal at his job, I've turned around and I've said, look mate, everything I've touched's gone down the toilet. I'd finished the job that I was on, you know, I put it right, I sorted the scratch out, fixed it, painted it, cleared it, it went out the door. But from then on, I just said, Adam, can you carry on painting today, because everything I've touched is rubbish, and I just feel like it's going to be one of those days. And without, you know, didn't even blink, in a heartbeat, he was like, yep, no problem, overalls on, next car in, paint, bam, 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 bam. And to be able to rely on guys like that's phenomenal. So, you know, if you're out there and you've got someone that's not as skilled, you know, share your secrets with them, share your little tips. It really does help. I remember working with a guy. I don't want to give too many names here, but I won't. But he was asking me. He says, your paint seems to be a little bit cleaner than mine. He says, and I'm just wondering, you know, how do you do it? So I said, let me see how you're cleaning your cars down, and everything's normal. He's cracking on. And then I just clocked it. He didn't clean the bag, and it was in a production centre as well. So the bits of dust will gather on the bagging. And I just showed him. I said, look, get your water-based degreaser, clean this bit of bag. And he was kind of amazed how much dust and stuff was on the cloth afterwards. And he was like, wow, that obviously make a big difference. And from then on, his jobs were phenomenal. And it was like he'd done sort of 10 steps forward. He was a different painter, but you know. If I didn't tell him, if I just watched him, well, you're cleaning it all right, and you know, you seem to be doing the right things. You just must be a dirty painter. It wasn't one of them. It was like, right, what are you missing here? And it just happened to be a bit of dust on the bag. You know, clean the bag around the area he was painting, and it was night and day. You know, the polishers were giving him pats on the back because they didn't have so much work to denib, and they had an easy life, and he felt phenomenal afterwards because his jobs were coming out immaculate, and it was good. It's good to see, you know. Yeah, just share your knowledge. Which, you know, don't get me wrong, a lot of you guys do as well. You know, it's good. I'm still learning stuff. I think that's a big thing why I got quite good as well, because I've been through a few places. I'm the type of guy that doesn't take, let's say, crap from the management too well. You know, if somebody says, if you don't like it, leave, I'm usually waving goodbye while I'm grabbing my bag, kind of thing. I've always been a bit like that, but because I've been through a couple of body shops, getting to work with other good painters, and they might not even tell you your tips and tricks, but if you watch them closely enough, you'll pick stuff up. And because I've always wanted to be as good as I can be, you know, it paid off. Well, you know, just always asking questions. How are you doing this? How are you doing that? Like that lad I was just on about. If he never asked me how I got my jobs cleaner than his, we wouldn't have known. He was cleaning the car, cleaning the panels, doing everything right. It was just a small amount of dust on the bag. So try and learn as much as you can from others, and if you are a bit more skilled, try and share the love, shall we say. So we're about to wrap this one up now. It's come out nice. You'll see I walk around it in a minute, and you couldn't see any blemishes on the other side at all with regards to the transparency of the paint. So you have a little look. Client was really pleased. Obviously, a car doesn't have swear words all over the front of it, and you know, she's got it back in one piece, looking nice. One or two little nibs on the bonnet, but overall, you know, for it to turn out as nice as it has, you know, we were pleased. So I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. You know, thanks for sticking around as well if you got this far. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have fun.